So my talk is going to have three parts. The first, I'll quickly talk about the empirical findings. Then I'll introduce the theoretical framework. And finally, I'm going to use the theoretical framework to think about coordination. And I will discuss three papers when I talk about empirical implications. And in the interest of time, there's no way I'm going to give justice to any of the papers. So I will just talk about the parts of the paper that's related to great compression. So the first is the famous Brynjolfsson et al. Paper. I guess Eric is here. I call it upward compression. So this is a paper that looks at the effect of Gen AI on customer service support. The most interesting finding, or one of the most interesting finding, is that Gen AI increases the productivity of all workers, but it increases the productivity of the lower skilled workers more than that of the higher skilled workers. So if you look at the graph on the top right, so the top 20% of the workers, their skills are not improved that much by AI, but the bottom 20% of the workers, their skill is increased by AI by a lot. So another way to say it is that if you are a 60 mark student, with AI, you become 80. You're 70, you become 80. And if you're 80, you remain at 80. So everyone's score gets compressed upwards. Another very interesting finding of the paper is that the time it takes to become an experienced worker has shortened. So if you look at the bottom right curve, the horizontal axis is how long the worker has been in the firm, and the vertical axis is their performance or performance level. In the past, it takes about 10 months to be able to solve, let's say, 3 problems per hour. Now it takes only 3 months. So the time to become a good worker has been compressed. So just in summary, everyone goes from 60 to 80, and the time it takes to become 80 has been shortened. So this is upward compression. The second empirical study is actually work by me together with Jiegong and Yvonne Chen and Zilong Zhao. We call it downward compression. So what this means is that people whose scores are 85 now get actually compressed to 80s. So what we did is actually carried out an experiment on over 200 artists. And we're looking at the effect of giving them an Gen AI tool in how they draw pictures. So a unique feature of this study is that we video record the entire drawing process. So what this means is that we know in each moment of time, I'm going to admit Jin, what's the quality of their drawing. So what we find is that Gen AI has significantly raised the time quality curve. So on the top right, the blue curve is the traditional time quality curve without AI, and the red curve is the one with AI. So what you see is that with AI, the productivity or the quality goes up very quickly, and then it flattens. Since most of the audience here are economists, I don't need to say much about it. You can just see that once the curve becomes flatter, what it means is that the marginal return to effort to time become very small, and people tend to stop earlier. One of our main findings is the graph on the bottom right. It's the density graph of how much time people spend enjoying. The blue one is the one without AI, so you see that it's single peaked, and most people stop at 150 minutes. That's the time we give to them. But with AI, the curve become twin peaked. Lots of people actually stopped in a 60-minute, meaning that after 60 minutes, they see that there's very little return to drawing, and they stopped. So metaphorically, you can think about it is that if it takes me very little time to get an 80 mark out of 100, why bother to spend another 2 hours just to get another 5 points? So even if I could get 85, or I would get 85 without AI, with AI, I'm going to stop at 80. So in this sense, we call it downward compression. The third, okay. The third type of compression is I'm going to call it the sideway compression. This is drawn by a field experiment done at Procter & Gamble. And the researchers basically look at the effect of GPT-4 on individual and team innovation. And the main takeaway, I'm going to just summarize this really quickly of the study, is that if you are a single individual and you are powered with AI, you're going to do better work than two people without AI. But even if two people and they are empowered with AI, they don't do so much better in terms of quality than a team of one person with AI. So, pushing it a little bit, you could even argue what they show is that perhaps one person with AI is the best in terms of this type of innovation. So just quickly to summarize on the three empirical studies, we get three different types of compression. Upward compression is essentially if you're a 60-mark student, now you become 80. We have downward compression, which is like if you can get 85 or 90, but it takes a long time, now you actually prefer to get 80 because it takes you a very short period of time. Finally, there is a sideway compression, which says that to get the same work done, we now just need smaller sized team. So these are the empirical findings. Now I want to introduce a theoretical framework to make sense of it. At some level, you have already seen the theoretical framework, and this is a curve that you have already seen in the study on the artist. But here we want to be a little bit more general. We are going to call this red curve the great compression curve, and fundamentally, it's a curve of production function. So what do you think about productivity? Or it's not a point, but it's a curve. Production is a transformation from input to output. What we are arguing is that with AI, this curve now increases very fast initially, and then it flattens. Now you can put different labels to input and output, right? So in the artist paper, the input is the time, effort these artists spent, and the output is the quality. In the PNG paper, the input is team size, and the output is creative quality. In Eric's paper, one of the input is the time on the job is tenure, and the output is performance. And the other graph, the input can be thought about as the ability of the worker, and the output is the performance post AI. So in all of these examples, and I can add many more, that we see under the great compression that output rises very fast at the beginning, and then it flattens. Now, what's its implication? Well, from a production perspective, it's always a good news because given any level of input, now we see that output is higher. We see better output. But this is true only in a frictionless world. Now, if we add some friction, think about maybe there is a contracting friction such as asymmetric information. Then a better output, a better technology isn't necessarily going to translate into a better outcome. So you take the same curve here, and now imagine actually the input is the worker's effort, and the worker's effort cannot be observed. And because the worker's effort cannot be observed, we need to motivate this worker based on performance pay. Say maybe we need to give a bonus to the worker. Now you take this graph, let's say, just consider two levels of effort, low and high, and we want the worker to put in high level of effort. Now, without AI, the marginal benefit of putting effort is this bonus times the increased probability of success. Think about the probability of success as here as a measure of output. After AI, however, the great compression curve means that the curve is flatter. So there is a smaller increase in the probability of success. And this smaller increase in the probability of success means the marginal benefit of effort have become smaller. And precisely because the marginal benefit is smaller, it becomes harder to motivate the worker. And in this case, if there is any friction such as limited liability, the worker will have information rent. And what we are saying here is that even if the output of the production function is so much better than before, so AI improves production, it also forces the firm to give worker a bigger information rent. And as a result, you can show, and actually both in lecture notes I have with Luis Garicano and Yanhui Wu, and also in a paper I have with Matthias Fang, that actually the firm can be worse off. So just to summarize the conceptual framework we have here, AI has two types of effects. I'm going to call them yin and yang. The yang part is the benefit of AI. AI makes the firms more efficient. AI decreases the production cost. So essentially, it lifts the input-output curve up. However, at the same time, AI increases or may increase the transactional cost. In the example I showed that AI makes it harder to motivate the worker. And the result of this is that actually AI could make things worse. I believe that Guo Sheng before mentioned that now all of the CVs may actually look very similar. So this is another example that essentially transaction costs have become higher. So in a sense, is that if you want to evaluate the effect of AI, you want to separate the production cost from the transaction cost, and the joint effect will be the sum of these two. So I'm going to use this framework to look at AI's implications on coordination, and I'm going to look at the two topics. One is on communication within teams, and the second is the architecture of the team. Let me start with the communication. Again, if you think about the AI's productive capability, AI is going to make communication easier. So here's a story actually from a friend of mine who is a professor at Fudan University. He says that in the past, he loved to do interdisciplinary work, talk to the medical doctors, but he was not very successful. And the reason is that he finds that it's difficult for him even to get the answer to the basic questions. As a result, that anytime he asks questions, they're likely to be dumb questions. And these medical doctors are going to think that you ask dumb questions, you're probably dumb, and they don't want to work with him. But now with AI actually compresses the time to reach the basic level of competence. As a result, now before actually talking to these doctors, he asks questions to AI first, and then he managed to ask these smart questions. And with smarter questions, that these doctors now think he is smart, and then they're going to do more cooperation with him. So in this sense, the AI on the yang side increases the communication capability. But the yang side apart, there's also the inside. So this is based on a paper I have with Daniel Ferreira at the London School of Economics. We are looking at the relationship between CEO and the board. Now, if you actually think about the communication between the CEO and the board, it's a little bit complicated. Let's say that the CEO finds out there is a problem, and this is the CEO's private information. Now, the CEO now faces a dilemma about whether to ask the question to reveal the problem to the board. And in a sense, revealing the problem is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, revealing the problem can enable the board to help solve the problem, so that's valuable. On the other hand, now the board knows that you actually have a problem. So at one point, maybe they're going to use the problem to hold against you. So that makes the CEO not so willing to share the problem. Now, how can we actually get the CEO to share the problem? Well, perhaps the board sometimes need to commit to be friendly so that they're not going to fire the CEO easily. And that's the way to induce the CEO to reveal the problem. So this is actually a famous paper by Adams and Ferreira called the Friendly Board. Now let's look at how this problem changed in the age of AI. Now in the age of AI, the CEO has a new option, which is not asking the board a question, but instead ask AI. AI may not be totally right. AI may not be as good as the board, but AI may actually help the CEO to solve the problem. So this actually, the existence of AI actually make communication more difficult. So just to summarize these two examples. So at some level, AI changes both the on-equilibrium and off-equilibrium payoff. So what do I mean by that is that with AI, it's easier to do the right thing because of the productive capability of AI. At the same time, actually AI makes it easier to do the wrong thing as well. And in the end, does AI help or hurt communication? Again, will depend on the race between these two. And if AI actually increases the off-equilibrium payoff more than on-equilibrium payoff, then perhaps communication become harder. Another point I want to add here about communication is that precisely because AI changes people's incentive, changes the capability to communicate, organization should adjust at the same time. So this is similar to an earlier point, many are on complementarity in organization. So think about the doctor example, right? In the past, that the economists, when they actually try to collaborate with the doctors, things are not very successful most of the time. So perhaps the organization don't need to invest much to make them do interdisciplinary work. But now with AI, the collaboration is more likely to be successful. That means the return to create more opportunities for cross-functional work has increased. So this means that the organization is going to adjust to create more opportunities. Similar in the case between CEO and the board. Right? In the past, we already know that the board need to be friendly. But now, because the communication incentive of the CEO have become even worse, then to get the CEO to communicate, the board may have to be even friendlier. There might even be more entrenchment for the CEOs. So this is what I have to say about communication. On the last 5 minutes, let me take to talk about the architecture of coordination. Let me think about the simplest case of team production, and I'm going to call it yogi and the commissar. So think about the two-dimensional model, where yogi are people who are great in thinking, but they are terrible in ability to doing things. And the commissar is the opposite. They're very bad in thinking, but they are high in their skill of doing things. Now, when economists look at this, they say that's great, right? We have specialization. Yogi can think, commissar can do. We put them in a team, good things is going to happen. We're going to leverage the comparative advantage of each two. But what's the problem? The problem is that if you only have yogi and a commissar in an organization or in a team, there'll be coordination cost. And one of the coordination cost, not much focused by economists, but I think it's very real in practice, is that the yogi and the commissar are going to despise each other. Yogi is going to think commissars are dumb. Commissars are going to think yogi, maybe they can only think, they only talk, they never get anything done. So how do we solve the coordination problem? One of the way the coordination problem is solved is through by having a manager. Manager might not be as good at thinking as yogi or as good as doing as commissar, but he can talk to both sides. So in a sense, it's instead of specialization versus coordination, the manager's role is that they specialize in coordination. This is the typical case when you think about it before AI. Now, after AI, what happens? I think we have alluded to the potential disappearance of the middle manager already. After AI, yogi doesn't need to talk to the manager, tend to collaborate with commissar. Maybe yogi can actually just talk to AI the great compression curve means that you can get the knowledge actually for doing from the AI, and the commissar can get the knowledge from the AI to think about things. So maybe in the future, one possibility is that we're going to have a very small team. We're not going to have managers. We're just going to have a AI enhanced yogi, AI enhanced commissar, or maybe AI enhanced manager. You can talk about, which type of groups actually benefit from AI most. I think that would be an interesting empirical question. But we have heard, this term about role softening a lot, right? In a team where the designers, engineer, or product manager, we may now see that the designer can do engineering work and engineering can do design work. So we are going to see that manager is disappearing. But the other type of architecture may be that they still coordinate, but the yogi and the commissar coordinate through a single AI manager. Or maybe in the future that they coordinate, they each have their own AI agent, and the AI agent will talk to each other. It'll be interesting to see in the future which architecture of coordination show up. But I do want to mention that I don't want to suggest that in the future that the team will become smaller. In fact, team can also become bigger if AI can solve contracting problems. So this is a quote from Terence Tao, who actually said that in the past the teams among mathematicians are very small. 5 is kind of the maximum because you need to work with people who you trust. But now you can actually collaborate with hundreds of people. Why? Because technology, this Lean program, actually allow you to better observe the work of others. So you'll be able to better check the work of other people. And once you solve these contracting frictions, team can actually become bigger. So in the future, are we going to have small teams, large teams? I mean, I'm going to have this conjecture I talked with Long in the past is, what do we think about the optimal size of the firm? It take out and even a high school economics book, we like to think about the efficiency as a function of the size of the firm is an inverse U, right? Because if you have too few people, there's fixed costs. So economy of scale increases the efficiency, but eventually because management has this economy of scale, efficiency goes down. But perhaps in the future, we're going to see that we just have a lot of small firms. These are the unicorns, but we also have a lot of super big companies because AI, to some extent, help to solve the coordination problem. That's a conjecture. But let me summarize here that I've talked about the great compression. The great compression curve says that we're going to have a very rapid initial rise, but then later on the productivity really plateau. If you like, it is kind of like an 80-20 rule, but it's on steroids. I want to emphasize the distinction between the production cost versus transaction cost. If we think about the effect of AI, we need to distinguish the difference between these two. Production cost typically goes down, but transaction cost may go up. Finally, I think once the transaction cost changes, it's particularly important to have the organization to do a response to it as well. So we at Hong Kong U, we actually teamed up with Deloitte. We did a C-suite level survey and asked people about what is the biggest barrier to organizational change. It turns out that the biggest barrier to AI adoption, the biggest barrier to AI adoption is actually organizational. There's too much silo. So I guess the broad point is that to make AI truly reach its potential, we need to think a lot about organization. That's what I have. Thank you.